What happens if you notch the end at the bearing point of a deck joist? Kind of like this. See how it's notched where it's sitting in the hanger? Okay, not a good example. What about this? Notched and in a joist hanger. Now, if you look in close, they didn't actually cut the bottom portion of the notch out. They just cut into the joist. But it would be the same as if you had notched this little portion out. So looking at building codes, I'm a building code educator. What does this do? And we'll talk some engineering here as well, and to explain the code. So being what I do in the industry as a code educator, I often get emails from folks asking for some assistance. And so I got an email from a code authority building department in Colorado, and they sent me the email with this little picture here showing what I just showed you, a joist hanger sliced into the end of the side hanger. And here's the prompt for what we're going to learn today. I have a question regarding a deck. I recently inspected a deck and the carpenter kerfed the ends of the joist to hide the bottom of the joist hanger. It's a 2x10 joist with a 2x8 hanger notched into the end of the joist about 1.5 inches up from the bottom. I've been a carpenter for the last 30 years and have never sliced or notched the cut end of a joist. As I was taught, it weakened the whole joist at the slice. I'm referencing the 2018 IRC section 502.8.1. And I'm not interpreting it to say you can slice into the ends, but I need to make sure. I'm hoping you can either teach me something new or affirm my interpretation that it's a no-no. First, let me say, this is the kind of folks that you want serving your community in the role of a building official or building inspector. They want to do what's right. If this person was just hungry for power, they would not be reaching out to say, hey, let me get a second opinion. Maybe I got this wrong. So kudos to this. This is the kind of people we want in this job right here. Awesome. So this is the section he's referencing. I'm showing you it from the 2024 edition, not the 18, but it's the same thing. And what we see right here is it says, notches at the ends of the member shall not exceed 1/4 the depth of the member. And then there's nothing in here that refers to a reduction in span or that if you notch the member, if you notch a 2x10, it's now a 2x8. So there's no real clues here that would say that other than directly what it says is, yeah, you can notch the end at bearing. And then there is a figure that goes along with this that has some photos. Let's zoom in. And so here you can see it even showing you can go up to 1/4 of the depth of the joist, and you can notch at bearing. And again, there's nothing here saying this reduces your span, or now you have to go to the span charts based off of this thickness, not this thickness. And so the answer is yes, you can do this. You can take your 2x10, you can notch it down to say a 2x8, and you still get all the credit for the span as if it was a 2x10. Now I'll get a little out of my lane and I'll share with you the engineering behind it at a very basic level. So you engineers, stay chill, okay? I went to engineering school for 5 years in the evenings, but didn't ever finish. But that's okay. I was just learning engineering to be able to better explain what I'm going to explain to you. And so I did learn about bending moment diagrams. And when you're analyzing the span of a horizontal member under a uniform load like this, or even if it's not under a uniform load, you're going to analyze two things. You're going to analyze shear, and you're going to analyze the bending moment, or the moment. So in the easiest way I can explain this, shear would be a shear failure is like a catastrophic failure. You are literally like shearing the joist. You have two opposing forces at one part of the joist that would literally, create a shearing effect of the joist. This bending effect, this is related to the deflection, to the span of the joist now bending and, deflection. And there's deflection limits in the code in chapter 3. It would be L over 360 for a floor. So, and that's what always limits span, bending moment. Too much deflection is what maximizes your span, not catastrophic shear, okay? So bending is what controls maximum span. It's almost at 5 minutes already. Let me just try to simplify this and not go on and on. shear, here's where it's plotted basically in this chart. Notice at the center of the span, there is no shear. Shear is 0. Shear is the greatest at the bearing points, the forces of shear wanting to shear that joist in half. Greatest at bearing points, 0 in the middle. Bending is opposite. Bending is 0 at the bearing points. There's nothing trying to bend that material on a simple span like this. Bending is greatest in the middle of the span. Okay, so bending is related to spanning, right? Because the longer you span and the more load, you have that bigger bending force in the middle, and we're going to limit deflection. So if we bring this illustration, this figure back up, I showed you this last time, but look at this part of the figure. Notice it says no notches permitted in the center third of the span, but you could notch in the span here and you can notch in the span here, and then there's all limitations to those notchings. That's because this is about bending, right? And bending is related to the tension in the bottom and compression in the top, and that's going to be at the greatest in the middle, so you can't notch it in the middle. All right, let's look at shear. So again, shear, right? Catastrophic failure. Where is it greatest? It's greatest at the bearing points and 0 in the middle. But remember, shear is not what controls or limits the overall span. Deflection does, and we hit the limit with bending. So even though shear is greatest at the ends, we're not even close to reaching its maximum when we're looking at maximum span. And that's why if you have a 2x10 spanning, you're not notching anything here. And if you did, you're within limitations. And that 2x10 can still resist the bending, which then limits deflection and is how you get max span. However, that 2x10 is not near its shear capacity at the end. And therefore, you can go ahead and notch it down to a 2x8. It's still within shear capacity here, but you still have the 2x10 full bunch of meat out here to resist bending. Now, respectfully, this is a tough one. I face this question all the time. This comes up in education I do all the time. And it's because sometimes we think we know more than we do. And I don't mean that rudely. We've been doing something for 30 years, or we haven't seen something in those 30 years, or we've always seen something else in those 30 years. And so that builds our own internal bias. And then a lot of folks will lean to that bias rather than go, I don't know, man. I mean, the words say right here, clear as day, you can notch it, and there's nothing talking about reduced span. That's kind of what I'm saying. Like, hey, what would lead you to think anything else? Well, because we all kind of have this sense of common sense, or, like I say, our own biases based on our own experiences. I have those too. I have to fight daily against those, when I'm teaching code, especially, that I'm not sharing my bias. But that's the simple fact, as counterintuitive as it seems. No, if you take a 2x10 and you notch it to a 2x8 at bearing, it's still a 2x10. For the sake of maximum span in the code. And I did my best to show you the science, the engineering, the why behind it. I hope it was understandable. And again, no disrespect here, because this person has their bias. They have that 30 years making them go, this just doesn't seem right, even though I'm reading that section. But you know why I applaud this person, this professional, so much? Is they overcame that tendency to just say, I'm in charge. I've never seen this, so no, you can't do it. They overcame that tendency to serve their community honorably and correctly. And that is what we should ask of anybody in these positions. And yes, there is a whole nother thing that can be discussed here about torsional rotation and how tall the joist needs to be. So no gotchas on that. That's a whole nother 10-minute video to go through that. But yes, there's another feature that the joist hanger does, which is resisting torsional rotation. This video was all about the bearing point and the notching of the joist. Have a great day.